I never imagined that one small favor could turn my life upside down. It all started on an ordinary evening, the kind where nothing exciting ever happens, the kind where the most interesting thing you do is make a cup of tea and scroll through your phone. I was living a quiet, predictable life. Work, routines, small moments of comfort. I had just moved into a new apartment, and everything felt like it belonged to me. My walls were bare, my space empty but mine. I liked the simplicity, the ordinary predictability. It made me feel safe. I liked being safe. Then he appeared in my life, or maybe I should say, he stepped into the small world I had carefully built around me. At first, it was nothing more than a casual hello, a smile, a message that seemed normal enough. But there was something different in the way he wrote, in the way he asked me things. One evening, it came, the request. Can you do me a favor? Pretend to be my girlfriend for one night. I laughed at it. I thought it was harmless, ridiculous even. Pretend? Me? For one night? How could this even matter? But then I saw it. There was an intensity in his eyes, an urgency in his tone, that made me hesitate. It wasn't demanding exactly, but it wasn't playful either. There was something fragile hiding behind the words, something I couldn't put my finger on, and somehow I said yes. It felt like a small thing, insignificant, a tiny favor that couldn't possibly change anything. I had no idea how wrong I was. The night I agreed to help him, my ordinary life began to unravel in ways I couldn't have imagined. At first it seemed simple enough. I arrived, smiling, playing the part I had been asked to play. The room was filled with people I didn't know, polite nods and quiet conversation, but something felt off. There was tension hiding beneath every polite smile, a subtle weight in the air that made my chest tighten. I noticed the sideways glances, the whispers, the way people's eyes followed me even when I thought no one was watching. The moment started small, almost unnoticeable at first. A neighbor crossing the street to avoid me, a barista pausing before handing me my coffee, glancing at me as though I didn't belong. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it was coincidence. But then it became impossible to ignore. I overheard conversations, quiet mutterings that weren't meant for me, but found me anyway. Words like, "they don't belong," and "we can't let them stay," floated into my ears, and my stomach twisted. It was the first time I truly understood what it felt like to be excluded, to be watched, judged, and counted as less than invisible, all at the same time. The fear started to creep in slowly, like a cold shadow settling over my shoulders. Every moment became a calculation. What could I say? How should I act? One wrong expression, one slip of the mask, and I knew I would be exposed. I realized quickly that this was no longer about pretending for one night. It was about survival. Every look, every whisper, every subtle motion carried a weight I could barely understand. The world I had trusted to be ordinary, safe, and predictable was gone, replaced by something dark and unyielding. I couldn't sleep. Nights were endless stretches of fear and anxiety. I lay awake, listening to distant laughter that seemed to mock me, quiet murmurs that made my heart pound. The small acts of cruelty I had noticed, the sideways glances, the disappearing families, the subtle exclusion, suddenly made sense. This was bigger than me. It wasn't just a favor gone wrong. It was a glimpse into a system that thrived on fear, judgment, and exclusion. And somehow, I had been pulled right into its center. One night, it all reached a peak. I was standing there, pretending, smiling, acting as though everything was normal, when it happened. A single person stepped forward, voice low but sharp, filled with venom. They accused me of being an outsider, of not belonging, of disrupting something I had no right to touch. My chest tightened, my hands shook. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, but my words wouldn't come. I felt trapped in a cage made of judgment and hate, unable to move, unable to breathe. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't about one small favor anymore. It was about power, control, and the cruelty people hid behind polite faces. Every fear, every whisper, every unspoken rule had led to this point. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, every shadow sharper. I wanted to shrink, disappear, but I couldn't. Somehow, I had to survive. Somehow, I had to see it through, to understand how far things could go, and to face whatever truth was waiting for me on the other side. I took a deep, shaky breath and tried to stand tall, even though my body trembled. I felt the weight of all the families, all the people quietly pushed aside, the ones whose voices had been silenced by fear or prejudice. I knew, in that instant, that I couldn't just leave. I had to witness it. I had to see the full scope of what was happening. I didn't know it yet, but that night would change me forever. The silence in that room still haunts me. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty. It was heavy, suffocating, thick with judgment. Every pair of eyes locked onto me, sharp and unyielding, as though I had been unmasked, stripped bare in front of them. My skin burned, my pulse thundered in my ears, and yet the rest of the world seemed frozen, waiting for me to either run or crumble. I stood there, pretending to be steady, pretending not to be afraid. But inside, I was unraveling. My thoughts spun in circles. What had I agreed to? How had one small request led me into the center of something so hostile, so deeply rooted in cruelty? I thought back to the faces I had seen vanish from the neighborhood, the quiet moving trucks late at night, families who left without a word. I had told myself it was just life pulling people in new directions, but now I knew better. They hadn't left by choice. They had been pushed out. That realization hit me harder than anything else. My husband's request, no, I reminded myself his favor, wasn't just about me playing pretend. It was about survival. It was about appearances. It was about holding together a lie that hid something darker than I had ever imagined. The days that followed blurred into one another. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At the grocery store, I'd catch someone staring too long. On the street, footsteps would echo behind me, deliberate, slow, and too steady to be random. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that my nerves were making me paranoid. But deep down, I knew. They knew who I was. They knew I didn't belong. And worse, they knew I knew their secret. One evening, I was walking home. The air was cool, but sweat clung to my skin. I kept glancing over my shoulder, each shadow twisting into something sinister. My breath quickened as I neared my apartment building. Just a few more steps. Just a few more. For seconds of pretending everything was fine, then I heard it. Low voices, hushed, but not hushed enough. She's not one of us. Can't let her stay. My stomach dropped. I didn't dare look back. I tightened my grip on my bag and pushed forward, my legs moving faster than my mind. I fumbled with my keys, heart racing, and shoved my way inside. The door slammed shut behind me, but the words lingered, etched into my bones. I wasn't safe. Not even in my own home. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my hands pressed against my face. My tea went cold beside me. My thoughts spiraled. How did I get here? How could I escape this without tearing my own life apart? The more I thought about it, the more trapped I felt. Because walking away wasn't an option anymore. I had seen too much. I had heard too much. Sleep never came. Every creak of the apartment made me jump. Every flicker of headlights outside sent panic surging through me. I pulled the curtains tight, locked every door and window, and still I felt exposed, vulnerable, alone. My world had shrunk into a prison of fear, built by the whispers of people who believed they could decide who belonged and who didn't. And yet, despite the fear, I couldn't let it go. I started noticing things I had ignored before. Old documents in his desk drawer, tucked away, but not hidden well enough. Photographs of families I remembered from years past. Families who had left, or rather been driven away. Notes scribbled in margins, names crossed out, addresses marked. My stomach twisted as the truth unfolded in front of me. This wasn't just casual cruelty. It was organized, planned. I wanted to destroy it all, to tear the papers into shreds, to burn them and erase every trace of this darkness. But I couldn't. To destroy it would be to erase the evidence of everything those families had endured. And deep down, I knew that was exactly what these people wanted. Silence, forgetting, pretending it never happened. But silence was suffocating me. Days passed, and the pressure only grew. Neighbors stopped greeting me. Conversations died when I entered the room. I felt their eyes on me at all times, sharp and calculating, as though they were waiting for me to make a mistake. And each time I passed someone in the hallway, each time I heard footsteps behind me, I couldn't help but wonder, was today the day they would finally act? Then came the night I'll never forget. I was sitting alone, the box of papers open in front of me, the letter trembling in my hands. His handwriting, so familiar, so steady, spelled out truths I wished I could unread. He hadn't just been part of this. He had recorded it, preserved it, as though it was some kind of legacy. The words blurred as tears stung my eyes. My husband. The man I had loved, trusted, built a life with. He wasn't who I thought he was. He had been part of something cruel, something hateful, all while smiling at me across the dinner table, kissing me goodnight, holding my hand. My heart broke and hardened at the same time. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the letter into pieces, but I couldn't. Because this was the truth, and if I didn't face it, who would? I shoved the letter back into the box and locked it away, but the weight of it pressed down on me like a stone I couldn't carry. That night, I sat in the dark with the box at my side, every door locked, every light off, waiting for the moment they would come for me. And as the hours dragged on, a chilling thought kept repeating in my mind. Maybe they already had. Maybe the trap was already set. Maybe it was too late. The nights after I found the box felt like living inside a ticking clock. Every second had weight. Every sound could be a sign that they were closing in. I tried to act normal during the day, smile at the grocery clerk, nod to the neighbor in the hall, but the act wore me down. My hands trembled or now, not just from fear, but from the heavy knowing. I had proof of something cruel, and I didn't know who to trust. The world I knew had split into before and after, and I was stranded somewhere in the middle. I started to watch people like they were part of a film I hadn't been cast to play in. I studied faces at stores, at the bus stop, at the little cafe where I pretended to read and sip coffee. I noticed patterns, the same subtle looks, the same polite avoidance, the same conversations stopping the second I neared. It was as if invisible lines had been drawn in the neighborhood, and I'd crossed one without seeing it. My heart ached for the families whose photos I had found, the names in his notes, the addresses with dates next to them, like a ledger of disappearances. The more I learned, the angrier I became, and anger made my fear harder to swallow. I thought about going to the police, about holding up the box and forcing someone to listen. But which police? Which officer would look at my evidence and not see me first? The easy target, the story they already knew without knowing anything. I'd heard whispers about who they trusted, about how some doors closed faster than others. The thought of handing those papers over and being shrugged away, told there was nothing to be done, was unbearable. It felt like being handed your own betrayal. So I drifted into a dangerous plan of my own making. If no one would listen, maybe I had to make them listen in a way they couldn't ignore. I pictured the faces in the photos, the empty chairs at dinner tables, the boxes packed in secret. I imagined pointing to the ledger, to the names and saying, "This happened." I imagined people standing up and being angry, not at me, but at what had been done. The idea warmed me like a small, risky flame. It was stupid and reckless, but it felt like the only thing I could do without losing myself. I began to gather evidence quietly, like someone piecing together a puzzle in the dark. I copied names, dates, and addresses into a notebook I kept hidden in a false bottom of my closet. I took photos of documents with my phone, careful to angle the light so nothing reflected. I memorized handwriting quirks, dates, and phone numbers scrawled in margins. Each small piece of proof made me feel less powerless and more like a person with a purpose. But with each piece I collected, the danger sharpened. I could almost feel the invisible watchers leaning closer. One night, while I was photographing a set of old letters I'd found tucked behind a false panel in his study, a floorboard creaked. It was a small sound, the kind ordinary houses make, but in that moment, it was an alarm. My breath stuck in my throat. I froze, hands hovering over the phone, the light's glow painting my fingers in a sickly shade. Whoever it was didn't announce themselves. They didn't walk toward me. They stayed at the edge of the hallway, the silhouette of someone who knew exactly where to stand to be seen, but never really seen. "Who's there?" I called, trying to make my voice steady. It came out thin, like a thread. The only answer was the hush of the house and a muffled shuffle away from the door. I felt my pulse in my jaw. Someone had been inside the house. Someone had come close enough to hear me breathing. The thought of how much they might have known made my skin crawl. After that night, I stopped pretending the house was safe. I moved the box to a different place, under a loose tile in the bathroom floor I'd known about since I moved in. I doubled locked doors and bought cheap window alarms I could set before bed. Paranoia became my constant companion, and it fed on every small noise. Still, I kept collecting proof. I had to. The thing that lived under my fear was a stubborn insistence that the truth deserved light. As days passed, I noticed small acts of escalation around me. A flyer appeared in the building lobby about neighborhood safety meetings. The language oddly pointed about preserving community values. A neighbor I'd once considered friendly began to ask too many casual questions about my routine. When I worked, who I visited, if I had family in town. The questions sounded harmless until they didn't. They sounded like the shape of interest that becomes control. Then, the first real threat arrived. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no breaking down doors. But a paper note slid under my door one dawn. I woke to the sound of it, a soft whisper on the floor. I found it folded tight, the edges creased as if handled by nervous hands. Inside, only a single line. "We know." A name followed it, my name, written in a handwriting I recognized far too well. I felt a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. Someone close to me had made sure I understood the reach of their knowledge. Fear swallowed me, but beneath it was a strange clarity. The narrator in me, Alec, who had once smiled and made tea, was slipping away, replaced by someone who had seen too much to forget. I could leave, I thought, pack a bag in the night and run. But the thought of abandoning those photos, those names, the ledger of quiet cruelty tore at me. I could run and be safe somewhere else, but would that change anything? Would it give them the silence they wanted? Would the next family disappear while I hid? So I made a choice that terrified me. I reached out to a woman I barely knew, a local journalist whose byline I'd seen online. Her stories had a way of making people listen. I wrote an anonymous email at dawn, my fingers shaking as I typed, then hit send before my courage could waver. I attached a single photo, a single name, and nothing more. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The wait after that email was the longest part. Every knock at the door made me flinch. Each phone buzz made my heart race. I told myself I was being foolish, that a single message wouldn't change the power that had built itself brick by brick around this neighborhood. But beneath the doubt, a thread of hope threaded through me. The dangerous kind that makes you take steps into the dark, because the light on the other side might be worth it. And then, one rain-thin afternoon, the phone rang. A number I didn't recognize lit up my screen. I answered with my heart in my throat. A voice I'd only read on paper, calm, low, and curious, asked questions I had been too afraid to voice aloud. She wanted to meet. She wanted the rest. I felt a rush of relief and terror in the same heartbeat. Someone was finally listening. But the question that hung over me like smoke was louder than any hope. Had I called the right person, or had I simply put my life further in danger? When I agreed to meet her, it felt like stepping onto a frozen lake, every movement a test of whether the surface would crack beneath me. We chose a public place, a diner just off the highway, the kind of spot where truckers stop for coffee and nobody looks twice at strangers. I sat in a corner booth, my back against the wall, watching the door every time it opened. My palms were slick against the chipped coffee mug I clutched. Every nerve in my body screamed that this was reckless, but the heavier scream was the one inside me. You can't keep this to yourself anymore. She arrived 10 minutes late, which felt like an hour. A woman in her 30s, hair tied back, rain on her coat. She didn't smile when she slid into the booth, and I didn't expect her to. She simply placed her recorder on the table, face down, and whispered, "Tell me." That's when I realized how starved I was for someone to believe me. My throat burned as I began, halting at first, then faster. About the box, the letters, the photographs, the ledger. About the families who had left in the night. About the note that said, "We know." Her eyes didn't widen. Her mouth didn't gasp. She just listened, steady, like she had heard. 1,000 people whisper secrets into her hands. When I pushed the photo across the table, the one I'd chosen to bring, I saw her jaw tighten. That was the only sign that any of this moved her. "Do you still have the box?" she asked, voice low. I nodded. She said 4 words that made my stomach drop. "You're not safe anymore." The diner's lights buzzed above us, but suddenly it felt too quiet, too sharp, like every ear could be tuned to us. She told me to leave the box with her, to trust her. She promised protection, exposure, headlines that couldn't be silenced, but every part of me wanted to clutch it tighter. It was the last piece of him I had, even if it was poisoned. My husband's handwriting, his choices, his secrets. It was proof of who he was and who he had lied about being. Letting it go felt like letting him go all over again. My chest ached with the choice. I agreed to one thing. I'd give her copies. I'd keep the originals hidden. She didn't push back. Instead, she leaned forward and said, "If you keep them, they'll know you still have them. If you give them to me, they'll know you talked. Either way, they're watching. The question is, what happens when they stop watching and start acting?" Her words landed like a punch. I thought the note was a warning, but maybe it was something worse, a countdown. We left separately. I watched her walk to her car, headlights bouncing across the wet asphalt, before I forced myself to leave. The air outside was sharp and cold, carrying the faint smell of rain and exhaust. I pulled my hood tight, trying to look ordinary, but I could feel eyes, imagined or real, on my back. At one point, a black SUV idled too long near the curb as I passed. My skin prickled. I sped up, heart hammering, every step an echo of the same thought. They know. That night, I dreamed of the families again. The Johnsons, the Garcias, the Woos. In my dream, they weren't packing boxes. They were staring at me, waiting for me to do something, waiting for me not to fail them the way my husband had. I woke up with tears on my pillow, and the crushing realization that there was no undoing this. I was already in too deep. The next morning, something small but chilling happened. On my doorstep sat a single object, the same kind of metal lockbox I had hidden, but this one was empty, lid wide open, as if mocking me. No note, no explanation, just a silent message. "We're inside your walls." My hands shook so hard I almost dropped it, and for the first time I screamed, not out of surprise, but out of the unbearable truth pressing in. I wasn't alone in this house anymore. I called the journalist, voice breaking, and told her what I'd found. She didn't waste words. She just said, "They're pushing you. They want you scared enough to run, or scared enough to give in. Don't. Just hold on." Her calmness was a rope I clung to, but my faith in survival was slipping fast. The empty lockbox sat in the middle of my kitchen table all day. Every time I walked by, it felt like it was waiting, daring me to open mine again. By nightfall, I understood what this really was, a game of endurance. The question was, how long before they stopped playing? The lockbox on my table became a presence in the house, heavier than any person could be. I avoided it at first, walking past with my head down, pretending it wasn't there. But every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights, made me glance toward it again. It wasn't just an object. It was a message. And the longer it sat there, the more it gnawed at me. Someone had been here, inside, close enough to know exactly what I feared most. I tried to go about my day. I washed dishes that didn't need washing. I folded clothes I'd already folded, but each sound outside, car doors slamming, dogs barking, the low rumble of engines, felt like a warning. My chest stayed tight. My breath shallow. Ow! When the phone rang once and stopped before I could answer, I nearly dropped the glass I was holding. They wanted me rattled, and it was working. By late afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I dragged my own lockbox out from its hiding place and set it beside the empty one. My hands trembled as I ran my fingers over the cold metal, the weight of it almost unbearable. 2 boxes, one filled with secrets, the other hollow, like a grave. The comparison made bile rise in my throat. I opened mine, The smell of old paper and ink rose up. The scent of my husband's lies. The letters were still there. The photographs. The ledger with its neat, cruel handwriting. I traced the pages with shaking hands, the words blurring through tears I didn't even realize were falling. My husband's voice echoed in my memory, warm and reassuring. A voice I used to trust without question. How had I missed the shadows underneath? That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not the ones in my head, not the ones that haunted me in the dark, but real ones. Outside, slow, steady, coming closer. My body locked up. I turned off the lamp, pressing myself against the wall, listening as the steps crunched against the gravel driveway. They paused near my window. My throat closed. Whoever it was stood there for too long, too deliberately. Then the sound of retreat, fading, until there was nothing but silence again. I wanted to convince myself it was a neighbor, someone lost, someone harmless. But deep down, I knew better. This was a reminder. We're here. We see you. That night, I barely slept. Every shadow in my room looked like a figure. Every creak of the house made me sit up, heart hammering. At one point, I swore I heard whispering outside, but when I forced myself to look, there was nothing but the wind rattling the trees. My imagination was running wild, but what if it wasn't imagination at all? What if the Mosid, I were testing how far they could push me before I broke? By morning, I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I called the journalist again, my voice raw from lack of sleep. I told her about the footsteps, the lockbox, the feeling of being hunted inside my own home. She listened quietly, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. Are you ready to leave? Leave. The word caught in my throat. This was my home, the place where I'd built a life, where every photo on the wall told a story of who I once was. Walking away felt like surrender, but staying felt like waiting for something worse. I told her I needed time, but the truth was, I didn't have any. That evening, when I pulled into my driveway after a frantic trip to the store, there was something waiting for me again. This time it wasn't a lockbox. It was a single photograph, tucked under my windshield wiper. A picture of me, taken from behind, in my own yard. I froze, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My stomach dropped. The picture was recent. Yesterday, maybe even this morning. They weren't just reminding me anymore. They were circling closer, making it clear that nowhere, not even the safety of daylight, was safe. I sat in the car for nearly an hour, unable to move, staring at that photograph, as if it might disappear if I willed it hard enough. But it didn't. It was proof, undeniable proof, that the walls around me had already been breached. When I finally went inside, I locked every door, every window, then dragged a chair under the knob of my bedroom door. I lay in bed, clutching the photograph to my chest, shaking, whispering the same words over and over. Don't break. Don't give in. But deep down, I wondered, how much longer could I last before they decided that fear wasn't enough?